Odysseus, the man who outsmarted a cyclops and survived 10 years of divine punishment just to get back home. He wasn't killed by a monster, a god, or an enemy soldier. He was killed by his own son, using a sharpened fishbone on the beach of his own kingdom, and he never once knew the boy's name.
Here's the twist almost nobody brings up when telling this story. The blind seer Tiresias warned Odysseus that death would come to him from the sea, so he spent the rest of his life terrified of storms, shipwrecks, and drowning. He was so busy scanning the horizon for the next wave that he never noticed the actual danger walking toward him on 2 legs, carrying a spear, sharing his exact bloodline, unaware of who he was about to meet. That danger had a name. Telegonus, a son Odysseus never raised or acknowledged, born to the sorceress Circe during those 10 lost years at sea. Telegonus grew up without ever seeing his father's face, eventually sailed toward Ithaca on a routine raid for supplies, and ran straight into an aging king he had no way of recognizing. Neither man understood who the other actually was until the fight was already over and it was too late to matter. The weapon Telegonus happened to be carrying that day wasn't ordinary bronze. It was a spear deliberately tipped with the venomous spine of a stingray, a literal object pulled straight from the sea, fulfilling the old prophecy in the most sideways, almost sarcastic way the myth could manage. The smartest man in Greek legend had outmaneuvered gods, monsters, sirens, and armies, and still could not outmaneuver simple, brutal irony in the end.
Matt Damon's Odysseus in Nolan's Odyssey ends his journey the moment he finally reaches Penelope. Bow drawn, home secured, suitors defeated. That's exactly where the film closes the book on him forever. The actual ancient legend keeps writing well past that reunion scene, and what it writes next is far darker. The cleverest man alive, ended by a child he never met, holding a bone instead of a blade on the very shore he'd fought so hard to reach. Achilles. Now picture the complete opposite kind of hero and the complete opposite kind of death. Achilles was untouchable everywhere except one single heel, a detail later poets actually bolted onto his legend after the fact. He wasn't taken down by some legendary rival in fair, honorable combat either. He was killed by Paris, the one fighter in the entire war that Achilles openly despised as a coward, a man he wouldn't even consider a worthy opponent. Paris didn't even need to aim well for any of it to matter. The god Apollo personally guided the arrow straight into Achilles' one true weak point, the only inch of his body that could actually be killed. It wasn't skill on Paris's part, and it wasn't courage either. It was simply a god openly cheating on behalf of the worst archer on the battlefield. And unfortunately for Achilles, it worked instantly and completely. Some darker versions of the myth make the death even uglier than a simple arrow strike. They claim Achilles wasn't struck down in open battle at all, but was ambushed inside a sacred temple, lured there for what he believed was a private, peaceful meeting under false pretenses. No shield raised in his defense, no real chance to fight back, just a hidden blade waiting in a room where he genuinely believed he was safe from harm. That's the real, uncomfortable ending for the single greatest warrior of his generation, killed by the one man he respected the least, with no honorable fight to speak of afterward at all. The same myths that spent centuries building him up as untouchable spent just as much effort making sure his final death carried zero dignity attached to it whatsoever, almost as if fate itself wanted the irony noted for good. Agamemnon. Agamemnon commanded the entire Greek army, burned the city of Troy to the ground, and somehow survived 10 brutal years of siege warfare without a serious scratch on him. He lasted less than a single week back home in his own palace afterward. He was murdered in his own bathtub by his own wife, inside the exact same palace he'd left behind as a proud king a decade earlier, never once expecting betrayal from inside his own walls. His wife Clytemnestra hadn't simply snapped one afternoon out of nowhere. She had been quietly planning his death for the entire 10 years he was gone at war, furious that he had sacrificed their own daughter years earlier just to secure favorable winds for his ships. That's an entire decade spent smiling, waiting patiently, and mentally rehearsing the exact moment her long-awaited revenge would finally arrive at her door. When that moment finally came, she trapped him inside a heavy net or robe while he calmly bathed, pinning his arms so tightly that he couldn't fight back or even manage to stand up straight. Helpless, so
soaking wet and completely tangled in fabric. He was hacked apart with a heavy axe by Clytemnestra herself, or perhaps her lover Aegisthus, while Agamemnon struggled uselessly against the net wrapped around his own body. The conqueror of Troy, the single man an entire army had answered to without question, died naked, wet, and helplessly wrapped in cloth like a trapped animal caught in a net, killed inside the one place on earth he genuinely believed was safest, his own home, his own private bathtub, murdered by the one person who had spent an entire decade making absolutely sure she got every single detail exactly right.
Heracles. Heracles was by every single ancient account the physically strongest being to ever walk across the earth. 12 grueling labors, countless monsters, and angry gods. None of it ever managed to kill him or even come close. What actually killed him was a supposed gift from his own loving wife, a woman who genuinely believed she was saving their troubled marriage instead of accidentally ending her husband's entire life forever. Deianira had been secretly given what she thought was a powerful love charm, a ceremonial robe soaked in the blood of the centaur Nessus, meant to keep Heracles faithful to her forever and always. She had absolutely no idea that the blood wasn't magical at all, but was instead lethal poison, tainted years earlier by the venom of the deadly Lernaean Hydra that Heracles himself had once defeated in battle. The moment Heracles pulled the robe over his shoulders, the hidden poison activated instantly and fused the fabric permanently into his own living skin. Fire, countless blades, and monstrous beasts had never once been able to truly touch this legendary man, but one jealous, well-meaning gesture of love managed to do what absolutely nothing else in his entire mythology had ever come close to accomplishing before. The pain from the fused, poisoned robe was so total and unbearable that Heracles built his own funeral pyre with his bare hands and personally climbed onto it, burning away his own mortal body just to finally escape the agony consuming him. The strongest hero in all of Greek myth wasn't technically defeated by anyone. He simply surrendered, voluntarily, to fire itself, because a single poisoned robe left him absolutely no other option remaining. Jason found the legendary Golden Fleece, personally led the famous Argonauts across the known world, and became one of the single most celebrated names in all of Greek legend and storytelling. He didn't die in any kind of glory whatsoever. He died quietly, sitting in the shade, resting peacefully under the beached, slowly rotting hull of his own retired ship, long after he had already lost everything else meaningful in his life. By the very end of his life, Jason had become a genuinely broken man, sitting completely alone on the shore at Corinth, his entire family gone, his sense of purpose gone, his once loyal crew scattered across the world without him. The Argo, once the single most celebrated ship anywhere in the ancient world, sat abandoned on the sand nearby, slowly falling apart plank by plank under the unforgiving sun. He sat down beneath its hull to rest for a while, the exact same way he had probably done 100 times before without any incident. This particular time, though, a weathered, badly rotted piece of the ship's stern simply broke completely loose from years of decay and crushed him instantly where he sat resting. No dramatic battle, no legendary enemy, just tired old wood finally giving out at the absolute worst possible second imaginable. The same man who had once survived deadly sirens, a fire-breathing bronze bull, and an entire army of animated skeletons was ultimately killed by simple structural failure caused directly by the very ship that had made him a legend in the first place. Even the old myths themselves seemed to quietly agree there was nothing remotely heroic left in exactly how his long, storied life eventually came to its end. Ajax was called the Great for a very good reason, second only to Achilles himself in raw combat strength among every single Greek soldier at Troy. He's also the only major hero on this entire list to die by his own hand, and the actual reason why is somehow even more brutal than any ordinary battlefield death could ever manage to be on its own, once you understand the full weight of the humiliation involved. After Achilles finally died in battle, his legendary armor went to a formal vote among the surviving Greek commanders, and Odysseus won it through clever argument rather than through actual combat skill. Deeply humiliated by the loss, Ajax was then driven into a divine, God-sent madness by Athena herself, who twisted his mind until he genuinely saw the Greek commander standing directly in front of him, taunting him.
Trapped inside that induced madness, Ajax slaughtered an entire flock of innocent sheep, fully believing in the moment that he was finally getting bloody revenge on the very men who had wronged him. When Athena eventually lifted her cruel spell from his mind, he woke up standing surrounded by dead livestock, suddenly and painfully aware of exactly how far he had fallen, and precisely who had witnessed it all happen. The shame of it all was simply unbearable, enough that Ajax fell directly on his own sword to end his suffering for good. That particular sword had, ironically, been a gift of mutual respect from Hector, his greatest and most honorable enemy on the entire battlefield, meaning the very last honorable exchange of his life ended up becoming the exact tool used for his own final death, a detail poets never let go unnoticed. Theseus personally slew the fearsome Minotaur, escaped an impossible, unsolvable labyrinth, and even founded the great city of Athens itself with his own 2 hands. None of that legendary history mattered one bit once he was living in exile. He died from a single, completely unremarkable shove off the edge of a quiet cliff, arranged calmly by a man who had spent years pretending to be his genuine friend. Living out his final days on the island of Skyros, Theseus had quietly become a political liability to his own host, King Lycomedes, who eventually decided the aging, legendary founder was worth far more to him dead than he ever was alive. There was no dramatic confrontation, no formal accusation of any kind, just a simple, friendly invitation for a relaxing afternoon walk along the scenic coastline together. During that seemingly innocent walk, standing together on a scenic cliff high above the sea, Lycomedes simply pushed him off the edge without a single word of warning beforehand. No struggle worth mentioning afterward, no dramatic final words exchanged, nothing at all. The man who had once successfully navigated an unsolvable maze died because he trusted entirely the wrong host during what should have been an ordinary afternoon stroll. That's the complete, undignified ending for a man who once beat a monster that literally no one else on Earth could beat, simply shoved off a rock by someone he never once suspected, with absolutely nothing epic whatsoever about the actual moment it finally happened, proving quite clearly that the labyrinth was never truly the most dangerous thing he would ever have to face across his entire lifetime. Bellerophon personally killed the Chimera, a terrifying, fire-breathing hybrid monster that had once terrorized entire kingdoms for years, riding the winged horse Pegasus to finally do it. His eventual downfall wasn't caused by any monster either. It was caused entirely by his own growing certainty that his many great achievements had somehow earned him a permanent, guaranteed seat among the gods themselves on Olympus. Fully convinced he now deserved to live permanently on Mount Olympus alongside the gods, Bellerophon attempted to fly Pegasus straight up toward the summit, completely uninvited by anyone. Zeus didn't bother sending down a lightning bolt or some terrifying monster to stop this arrogant attempt. He simply sent one single small gadfly to sting the horse at exactly the wrong possible moment imaginable, and that alone was enough to end it. Pegasus bucked wildly in pain, Bellerophon fell helplessly from the sky, and the fall itself didn't actually kill him outright, which honestly almost makes the whole ending worse to think about. He survived the fall, but blind and permanently crippled, and spent the rest of his entire remaining life wandering a featureless, empty plain completely alone, shunned entirely by both gods and mortal men alike. There was no glorious, heroic death waiting anywhere for Bellerophon in the end. Only long, painful decades of complete isolation as punishment for one single arrogant decision made in a moment of pride. Sometimes ancient Greek myth decided the cruelest possible ending wasn't actually killing the hero outright at all, but instead making absolutely sure he lived long enough to fully regret everything that had happened. Meleager's entire life was tied, from the very moment of his birth, to a single, unburnt log sitting quietly in his own family's hearth. The three fates themselves declared he would live exactly as long as that specific piece of firewood managed to survive the flames, which meant his own mortality was genuinely never really his to control or protect on his own terms, no matter how strong or clever he eventually became. His mother Althea eventually learned this secret and hid the log away safely for many years to protect her son, essentially keeping him alive through nothing more dramatic than a single piece of hidden wood tucked away somewhere safe. Everything changed instantly, though, on the exact day Meleager killed her own two brothers during a heated, bloody dispute over hunting spoils and wounded family pride.
Consumed entirely by grief and burning rage at losing her own brothers to her son's sudden temper, Althea retrieved the long-hidden log from its hiding place and threw it straight into the fire herself, fully aware the entire time of exactly what the act would do to him, choosing her dead brother's memory over her living son's life without a single moment of hesitation or visible regret shown afterward by anyone watching.
Meleager himself was somewhere else entirely, completely healthy and uninjured when it actually happened to him. As the hidden log slowly burned down to ash inside his mother's hearth far away, he simply weakened without warning and died right along with it, killed by a quiet decision made in a room he wasn't even present in, by the one single person who had once loved him most in the entire world, for reasons he never got to hear explained.
Hector. Hector was Troy's single most respected defender, a man even his sworn enemies genuinely admired and feared in equal measure, and his eventual death wasn't just a tragic loss, it was a deliberate public humiliation staged in front of the very people who loved him most. It all started with a fight he was cleverly tricked into, and honestly never should have agreed to take on alone in the first place.
The goddess Athena disguised herself as Hector's own brother specifically to convince him to face Achilles completely alone in single combat, falsely promising backup support that would never actually arrive to help him. Realizing the painful deception far too late to escape it, Hector found himself standing utterly alone against the one warrior in the entire war he genuinely had no real chance against. Achilles drove his spear straight through Hector's exposed throat, ending the entire fight almost instantly and without much drama at all. That alone would have counted as a relatively clean death by the harsh standards of the ancient world. Achilles, however, wasn't finished there, and what happened immediately next turned Troy's fallen defender into a horrifying public spectacle instead of a fallen soldier. Achilles personally tied Hector's lifeless body to the back of his own chariot by the ankles and dragged it violently at full speed around the entire walls of Troy, in plain, direct view of the very city he'd spent years desperately protecting, while his own grieving family watched helplessly from those same walls, utterly powerless to stop any single part of it from happening right in front of them. For several agonizing days afterward, Troy's most honored defender was repeatedly mutilated in front of his own grieving father and devastated wife, his lifeless body used as a message rather than treated as a person deserving basic dignity. The proud city that once believed this war was winnable now watched its best defender dragged senselessly through the dirt and finally understood exactly what was coming next.